Good morning, good day, or good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to today's webinar from Global ESCO Network, broadcasted from Copenhagen. Today's topic is Super ESCOs, and it's presented to you by three excellent speakers, as we always have here at the Global ESCO Network, on the topic, which is Pierre Langlois from Econoler. It is Stéphane le Gentil from Wataka, and it's Jalel Chabchoub from the African Development Bank. Before I move on to the presentations from today, just a quick introduction of where this webinar is coming from. As usual, it's brought to you by the Global ESCO Network. My name is Søren Lytken. I'm the chairman of the network. We are hosted by UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center in Copenhagen, obviously, where we've been operating the network for the past more than 3 years. The Global ESCO Network works for the integrated use of ESCOs for the ESCO industry as implementation partner for energy efficiency. And our motivation in this regard, coming from the Climate Center, is climate change. We believe that energy efficiency brought on by ESCOs is one of the most efficient ways to address the climate change challenge. The Global ESCO Network aims to reinforce existing efforts of national and regional ESCO associations. So we are in practice a network of networks, and the network consists of currently 35 partners around the world. That is more than 90% coverage of ESCO associations globally. And we are guided by an advisory board of 6 members. Today's webinar is extended because of the great interest that we have, also because we have 3 speakers, to 90 minutes. Normally we have only an hour, but we have 90 minutes today, so that means 3 presentations of 20 minutes. It's followed by a Q&A session at the end, so please, while the speakers are speaking, address your questions in the chat box. We will collect them and we will present them to the speakers at the end of the webinar. This is the first webinar in 2023 by the Global ESCO Network, so just allow me very quickly to introduce our program for 2023 with subjects that we will be covering, and that's what you can see here on the screen. Super ESCOs is our first webinar this year, today. We will, next month, we believe, have a webinar on IFRS 16 and its impact on the use of energy performance contracting. I will not go into details with any of these topics, just quickly mention them. The following one is concerning a possible expansion of the scope. Not that it's not already in the market being expanded, but we are considering whether the Global ESCO Network should follow that expansion of the scope of ESCO operation to not only renewable energy, but also to electric vehicle charging, and considering those 3 as a package. We have considerations of doing that, but that would be discussed at this webinar. We also have Ivo, as Ivo is co-hosting the Global ESCO Network, and Ivo's work on measurement and verification is central to ESCO operation. We will be bringing that across as well as one of the webinars, together with another protocol promoted by Ivo, which is the Energy Efficiency Financing Protocol, also a subject for one of the webinars this year. We have last year published the first edition of a regulatory barrier analysis for ESCOs based on interviews with our ESCO associations. We will have a second edition of that barrier analysis coming out later this year. That will also be a subject for a webinar. And we are also working on the Global ESCO Network's general policy advice, which is also going to be a subject of a webinar this year. Also, contracts is one of our focus areas, and we will hopefully be able to launch a contracts library later this year, which would then also be a subject for a webinar. And finally, we find that the current work in the European Union on the development of the Buildings Directive and the Energy Efficiency Directives both are very interesting framework conditions for ESCO operation in the European Union. That's our program for webinars this year. We hope very much that you're going to join one or more of them. But first of all, we are happy that you are already here for this first webinar of 2023. And without further ado, I would like to hand over the microphone to Pierre Langlois. Pierre, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much for this opportunity that you give me to present and to be part of that Super ESCO event. So my name is Pierre Langlois. I'm the co-chairman of the Global ESCO Network, and I'm the president of Econoler, a consulting firm that's been working in the energy efficiency, energy transition, and ESCOs and Super ESCOs for the last 40 years. Super ESCOs are interesting as a concept. They are not new. They've been around for a long time as far as a concept, but as far as the operation itself, it's been not as long that they've appeared to the market. Super ESCOs are interesting in the fact that they're complementary to ESCOs, and they are essentially. So it was created related to the limitation of energy performance contracting to be able to finance project. As we know, and we commonly say that ESCOs are not banks, ESCOs are not financial mechanism by themselves, but they're going to help structure these financial mechanism by providing all the added value that they have and they provide on a normal basis. So the definition of a super ESCO can be presented as follows. It's an entity. It can be set up by public or private investors, that we will see in the presentation. So there's variations that offer full EPC services, because as a super ESCO, it's not better than an ESCO. It's not like something that would be over and above, but that's something that's complementary. And it's essentially offering the EPC services because it subcontract ESCOs for the implementation of project, but also offer adapted financing to its clients. So Super ESCO play a very important role in the structuring and development of ESCO activities, because they reinforce the capacity of existing private sector ESCOs, and may also develop, as we will see in the presentation of Stéphane, the new ESCOs that will be developing, because the Super ESCO is providing additional tools to make that concept more attractive in the market. So as I said, we will have two types of Super ESCOs: the one that are developed by the public sectors, and the one that are developed by the private sector. So far, most of the ones that have been created by the public sector. There's a few exceptions. So in this webinar, we'll present both and the type of activities and differences they have around the globe. So on this, I will give the floor to Stéphane, who will present the experience of the Middle East.
Thank you. So my name is Stéphane le Gentil. I've been a consultant under my own company, Wataka, and I've been working in the ESCO domain for at least 15 years. I've personally helped to launch two Super ESCOs in the Middle East. So I will give you an idea today of when did the Super ESCO start, what happened to the different Super ESCOs, how they were set up, and especially in the Middle East, because I think that's where we have the highest concentration of Super ESCOs, and what you need to have with Super ESCOs, how do they work, etc., etc. So the start really of Super ESCOs was in Europe, I think in the years 2000, probably the first one being in Berlin. So at that time, it was not called a Super ESCO, but it was called the Partnership for Energy Savings. And that was created in 1996 by the Berliner Energy Agency. And the objective of that Super ESCO or organization was to retrofit public buildings in Berlin, and that's what they did very efficiently. They've retrofitted 1,400 buildings. In average, they made 26% savings in energy, and they've been using energy performance contracts. All the projects have been executed by private ESCOs for the agency. Then a little bit later, in 2005, you had in Belgium FedESCO that was created by the Belgium federal state, and the idea was to retrofit 1,800 public buildings in Belgium. They've not really used ESCOs, FedESCO, but they've been using initially a model of horizontal measures, so typically deciding to isolate roofs of building and then selected companies for this and then applying this measure across the portfolio of building. And they've been doing this in for various measures. And only after a few years, they started to look at the use of ESCOs. In London, in 2010, there was a program called REFIT that was created by the City of London. It was then renamed a little bit later the Retrofit Accelerator. And the idea was to retrofit all the public buildings in the large London area. And they've been doing around 440 public buildings. Again, using energy performance contract executed by private ESCOs. So they've been launching a lot of tenders. And a lot of the projects in London were related to hospitals and I would say medical facilities. Then I think what we've seen is the concept went to India in 2009. There was the Energy Efficiency Services Limited, or EESL, company, which was created, but with a focus initially only on efficient lighting and not really using ESCOs, but more on a kind of a procurement model of efficient lighting to serve all the public buildings in India. They've been extremely successful on the lighting retrofit, saving a massive amount of energy. And then later on, they started to look at other measures like efficient fans, efficient air conditioners, etc., etc. But they've not been using ESCOs, so they had mostly a procurement model to serve the government. Then in the United Arab Emirates in 2013, Etihad ESCO was created to retrofit public buildings in Dubai. Etihad ESCO is a subsidiary of the electricity company, the Dubai Electricity and Water Authority. And the idea was to retrofit 30,000 buildings in Dubai, initially public buildings, but also going into the private sector. In 2017, in Saudi Arabia, the National Energy Services Company, which is called Tarshid, was also created and has two very specific programs. One was on street lighting, to retrofit all the street lights in all the cities and the roads in Saudi Arabia with efficient lighting, and also programs on public buildings focusing on the government buildings. In 2019 in Morocco, there is the Société d'Ingénierie Énergétique, or the Energy Engineering Company, SIE, which was created as a Super ESCO to retrofit buildings as well. In 2020, again in UAE, in Abu Dhabi Energy Services, ADES, was created to improve the energy efficiency of public buildings in Abu Dhabi. And finally, and I think that's the first start of a private Super ESCO, we see that in Canada. In 2021, the SOFIAC was created to help owners of private buildings to reduce their energy consumption and to decarbonize. So those are all the Super ESCOs that have been developed. As you can see, it's quite spread around. There may be some others that will be coming. There are discussions in Africa, in several countries, to have Super ESCOs. There are also discussions in Southeast Asia. So this concept is expanding also everywhere. So why setting up a Super ESCO? In general, I would speak only about public Super ESCOs, but they are part of global strategies of governments or local governments to reduce energy consumptions. And they are really set up to drive the improvement of a large pool of existing building in a centralized manner. It's a way to quickly centralize the competencies, the financing, and the knowledge to drive a program to improve the existing public buildings. So in Berlin or London, it was related to a local city strategy. So the program was really for the city to accelerate the reduction of energy consumption for municipal buildings. In Dubai and Abu Dhabi, Etihad ESCO and ADES are really components of a bigger strategic master plan for energy consumption reduction. So in Dubai, this is driven by the Dubai Supreme Council of Energy that has a demand-side management strategy to reduce consumption in various elements, and Etihad ESCO is serving the existing buildings component. And similarly, in Abu Dhabi, there is a strategy that is set up, demand-side management strategy set up by and managed by the Abu Dhabi Department of Energy. And similarly to Dubai, ADES is the entity that is managing the reduction of consumption for existing buildings. In Saudi Arabia, the setup of Tarshid was really linked to a national strategy for reducing consumption that is managed by a dedicated organization, the Saudi Energy Efficiency Center, or SEEC. And Tarshid was set up to reduce consumption for the public entities, lighting, as I mentioned, street lighting, but also public buildings. So in the Middle East, all the Super ESCOs are using ESCOs to deliver the projects and to execute the work. So they all have a typical model that is similar to this, where the Super ESCO has three main contacts, I would say, or three main interactions. One with the investor, which provides financing to the Super ESCO, and the Super ESCO is repaying this investor. So it can be directly, the investor could be the shareholder of the Super ESCO. So this is, for example, the case in Abu Dhabi. It could be a dedicated green fund that is set up to finance a green project. This is the case in Dubai, or a sovereign fund, which is the case in Saudi Arabia, where Tarshid is getting financing from the Public Investment Fund. Obviously, the Super ESCO is interacting with clients, which are, in that case, public buildings or public authorities, where they sign contracts that are either shared savings or guaranteed savings agreements with those clients. But they also go to private ESCOs to execute the work, the retrofit work. And in all cases, they sign guaranteed savings agreement with the private ESCOs. So the private ESCOs will execute the work and provide a guarantee on the savings that will be generated. And this helps to secure the financing of the projects. So in this model, the clients have nothing to pay. It's all paid by the Super ESCO that is getting its finance from investors. And the private ESCOs on their side are bundling solutions and equipments that they will be getting from equipment manufacturers. They will use a number of subcontractors that could be construction contractors, etc., to deliver the work, or O&M contractors. So that's the model that is being used in the Middle East. Now, a Super ESCO will not work easily alone, especially in the public sector. It needs supporting mechanisms to support the development of its work. So I've illustrated here the supporting mechanisms that have been developed in Middle East. So for example, in Dubai, when the Super ESCO, when Etihad ESCO was created, there was also a supporting mechanism created and managed by the Dubai Regulatory and Supervisory Bureau, which consisted of having an ESCO accreditation scheme. So the companies wanting to work in that domain needed an accreditation from the Dubai RSB. But also the Dubai RSB have been created a specific MNV protocol based on the very well-known IPMVP, but with slight variations to adapt it to the local climate. And the RSB has also published officially standard contracts for shared savings and guaranteed savings. Then also there was a specific funding that was set up through the creation of the Dubai Green Fund. So the Dubai Green Fund is funding the Super ESCO, but is also funding other green projects in Dubai. In Abu Dhabi, the Department of Energy, they've been publishing a directive for the local government entities to require them to save energy. In fact, that's the Energy Efficiency Directive, and that's helping the Super ESCO. But also the Super ESCO is getting funding available from its shareholder, TAQA. In Saudi Arabia, and I think that's the model that has been the most successful in terms of supporting mechanisms, because you will see a lot of support has been given to the Super ESCO. So first of all, there was a royal decree that was published mandating retrofits and the exclusive use of the Super ESCO by government entities. So basically, all government entities were requested to reduce their consumptions and to do it through the mandatory use of the Super ESCO. So this has created automatically, I would say, a huge pipeline of clients for the Super ESCO. There was a second thing that was done also, which is to standardize the contract between the Super ESCO and the clients being the government authorities. So this contract was approved and mandated by the authorities. So this means that there is no flexibility to change the contract, no legal negotiation. So between the Super ESCO and the government entities. So this has for effect to accelerate the set of projects because there is no legal delays, no legal negotiations. And similarly, the Super ESCO has pre-negotiated standard contracts with the ESCOs so that all the legal elements are extremely fast to be signed between the different parties. Because that's usually one of the issues that you can find with Super ESCOs is that each client will want to have its own contract. Each ESCO will negotiate its contract. So a project can be delayed a lot due to the negotiations of contract. In Saudi, they've really streamlined this so that there's no delay because of legal negotiations. There is also a licensing scheme for ESCOs. So to be able to be an ESCO in Saudi, you need a license, and this license is managed by the Saudi Energy Efficiency Center. And obviously also in Saudi, they are getting funding from their shareholder, the Public Investment Fund. So really, the key success factor of a Super ESCO, there are a few. So I mentioned a financing solution integrated to the Super ESCO or very close to the Super ESCO. And the reason is that if you don't have a financing solution, then the Super ESCO will only be able to address clients that have budgets to retrofit their buildings. And not many clients have dedicated budgets. And if they have to request budgets, especially in the public sector, it can take a long time. They need to have the budget approved on yearly cycles, etc. So having a financing solution is really key to the success of the Super ESCO. Obviously, you need to have a team of experts with sharp knowledge in the ESCO domain within the Super ESCO to be able to negotiate with ESCOs, but also to set up the proper procurement mechanisms, contracts, etc. For public Super ESCOs, you also need a very strong support from public authorities. And I've put in brackets mandate, because that's the ideal thing. If the Super ESCO gets an official mandate, then it will have a lot of facilities to develop projects. And the best example again is Saudi Arabia. They've not been doing any kind of business development, the Super ESCO in Saudi Arabia, because simply all the government entities went to see them saying that they needed to retrofit and they need to work with them. So the Super ESCO was only there to organize projects for the ESCOs. So a lot of activity has been going on there. And finally, I will see the Super ESCO needs to have an autonomy for action and decision in order to be fast and efficient in its processes. So that's my last slide. Just the key elements that I see as a conclusion is that setup of a Super ESCO is a solution to reduce quickly the energy consumption of a mass of buildings by centralizing the expertise and the financing within the same entity. We've seen that the Super ESCO concept has been expanding geographically, so there is a big interest into this, but each country has its specificities, and the model needs to be adapted really in each case. Very importantly, also, as I mentioned, to be efficient, the Super ESCO needs to have a financing solution. And in the public sector, it requires a strong support and mandate from the public authorities to be successful and to be fast in action. As we will see, the extending of Super ESCOs to the private sector will accelerate the private sector decarbonation, while also having a side advantage of potentially reducing the use of public subsidies. And this I will let my colleague explain all this. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stéphane. And my turn to present another kind of experience, which is the Super ESCO concept that was developed in Canada. So it's called the SOFIAC. It's an acronym for a French term that would call Société de Financement et d'Accompagnement en Performance Énergétique. So Society for Financing and Supporting the Implementation of Energy Performance Projects. And the context is interesting because in Canada, it's obviously a rich country, which promoted the use of energy efficiency for many years. So over the last 30 years, there's been programs and there's been initiatives, both in the public and the private sector, through mainly subsidies to support the implementation of these projects. We have an adapted regulatory framework that allows the use of performance contracting for many years. The first ESCO was created 40 years ago, didn't needed any kind of regulatory adaptations. And since then, there was program at the federal and the provincial level to enhance the use of performance contracting. It's also there's also the presence of very important subsidies in both provinces, as well as the national, as well as the federal government. So there's a lot of financial support to implement energy efficiency. And because it's been around for so long, there's a very vast experience of energy efficiency on the technical side with consultant engineers, equipment manufacturers, and as well as ESCOs who are around to support the implementation of these projects. There's a very strong experience and presence of ESCOs because, as I said, it's been around for 40 years. But it was perceived, or it was known that these ESCOs were essentially working in the public sector, answering tenders, and waiting for the government to issue requests for proposals for implementation of these projects. So there's been a lot of experience in the use of EPC, and still this innovative approach of EPC was not used in the private sector. And one of the reasons was that there was no presence of adapted financing mechanism for energy efficiency projects. As a rich country, billions of dollars have been used or have been given by the government to support the implementation of these projects, but nothing really linked to adapted financing mechanism, even though accessing a straight loan was very, very easy for corporations and companies in Canada. Like I said, there's no real EPC market in the private sector since before the Super ESCO came in. And one of the reasons why was the private sector always focusing on short paybacks. So the subsidies that were used were bringing the paybacks from 6, 5, and 4 years to actually 3, 2, and 1 year, enabling the companies to accept to implement these projects compared to other ones that are not related to the energy sector or to the carbon emission reduction activities. So the focus has always been on the short term. And if we want to implement project, and especially using energy performance contracting, size matter on one hand, and the fact that the potential is there, but it's difficult to implement it because companies do not want to use their own funding, was a very big limiting factor. So as one of the reasons, this is one of the reasons why ESCOs were not getting into the private sector. So the first Super ESCO in Canada was created in 2021 with the objective to promote the effective energy transition throughout the country for the benefit of businesses. So it's essentially focusing on the private sector, to increase the profitability and competitiveness of businesses by reducing their energy consumption cost. So we'll see the mechanism they use to transfer something that can be perceived as negative, long paybacks, to something that will be perceived as positive with very short-term benefits. And obviously fighting against climate change, and that's why we've received, and that's why it received quite a lot of support from the government at the beginning to start up the operation. So it's an innovative mechanism to accelerate the transition and decarbonization of Canadian businesses. And it's been created by private sector entities. So it's been created by on an equity base. It's been created as an investment fund by two organizations: Fonds d'Action, which is a pension fund it's a labor pension fund, and by Desjardins, which is one of the major banking operation in Canada. And we have debt partner in the Canadian Infrastructure Bank and Fiera Debt Capital that are essentially corporations that lended to the facility. It's managed by a joint venture, which is Econoler and Fonds d'Action. Fonds d'Action, which is the investors, and Econoler, which is the company that designed and operates the whole activity. And it received financial support first by the government of Quebec, who perceived that such an initiative by the private sector would enable an acceleration of the implementation of energy efficiency project through and achieving its goal in the energy transition, as well as Stéphane mentioned, limiting the use of grants to always increase the amount of activities within the market. And it received the support from the government of Canada to expand the concept from the province of Quebec to outside Quebec and within all the other provinces. So the SOFIAC develops, invests, and manages energy retrofit and decarbonization projects to the benefit of Canadian businesses, and it works essentially in three sectors. It worked in the commercial sector, into the industrial sector, and to the multi-residential sector. So it's an offer based on the Super ESCO concept as Stéphane presented it. The concept is that the clients do not have to pay anything, so there's no upfront investment, and there's never going to be an investment on their part throughout the project implementation, as well as during the payback period. We use a turnkey projects approach, so we use ESCOs who will provide us a turnkey approach for projects that will be implemented. It's technically and financially risk-free in the sense that if there's no savings, there's no payment, and all the technical risks are taken by the ESCOs who are subcontracted by the Super ESCO. We focus on 10 to 15 years contractual arrangement. So very long term, way longer than private sector companies are used to. And the rationale for that is to go into the deep retrofit approach, where we're able to reduce the consumption and the carbon emissions by quite a lot. It structures as a non-recourse subordinated debt, meaning that it will not have any impact on the capacity to borrow by the private sector and by the clients, and achieving the goal of enabling them to continue their operation as business as usual while implementing these deep retrofit projects. And it's available across Canada. The concept is the same as Stéphane presented. So Sofiac is essentially an aggregator. It aggregates financing through a $200 million financing capacity that was provided by the lenders and the investors. Those participants, those actors within the Super ESCOs are interested in the energy efficiency project and the retrofit of buildings. But the way they're structured, it's very difficult for them to structure something as innovative as the Sofiac and go to market with very small projects, meaning less than $1 million, for example. So that's why we aggregate the savings, meaning that as of day one of the project generating benefits, the customer becomes cash flow positive. The Sofiac relies on energy service companies, so it works with them for everything related to the projects. In that sense, it's a real Super ESCO. It subcontracts the ESCOs for the design of the project and for the implementation. And it will actually let the energy service company be innovative, because as a way of procurement, there's two ways: either on a sole source basis, when the ESCO can come to Sofiac with um, with a project where they have a customer that would be interested, but they lack the financial capacity to implement it. Or either Sofiac will go to market with clients and request bids from ESCOs to provide the best project, and the best project being the one that is the one that generates the most savings within the accepted time frame. And the ESCOs are obviously working with suppliers, equipment manufacturers. They can work on open book. They can work on a lump sum approach. It's very, very flexible as a mechanism. And one of the added feature that Sofiac added is an independent party for measurement and verification. So the measurement and verification approach is agreed by all parties at the design. And when it's time to demonstrate the savings, on one hand, to bill the customer based on the savings and to apply the guarantee to ESCOs when needed, then there's an independent party who actually implement the agreed measurement and verification plan. So as I said, there's no upfront investment from client. There's no impact on client borrowing capacity. The contractual agreements are long-term to enable the benefits, and the technical, financial, and operation risk are taken all by Sofiac. So we work with ESCOs within the market, and we made sure that we would add all active ESCOs in Canada. So you have a list of ESCOs that are currently accredited and working with Sofiac. We're adding some on a current basis, essentially because companies who have the ability to implement and design these projects want to start acting as an ESCO, because they see the Sofiac as a very solid partner. It becomes their client on one hand, and on the other end, they like the concept of the Sofiac going to the market, making the business development for them, and being able to bring them opportunities. On the other end, these ESCOs face the same problem as all others around the world, where when they meet clients, they develop very innovative projects. They have the capacity to identify these savings and these opportunities for clients. They face the issue of clients not having the budget at the beginning, not wanting to enter into long-term contracting, and then they're able to turn around and work with Sofiac to break these barriers and enable them to increase the number of projects they're implementing. As far as technologies, as a Super ESCO, very often it would be the case, it's totally agnostic to technical solutions, as long as they're able to generate a positive cash flow and they're able to be financed. Otherwise, the technical solution is left to the market, and the ESCOs will take the benefit of the subsidies that are available in Canada. They will optimize them, and they will try to find the best solution for each client to actually reduce their consumption as well as to reduce their carbon emissions. The key to the success of a super ESCO is very often the positive financial impacts it has on its client. So on one side, and it's kind of strange, but in Canada there's so many subsidies opportunities that offering the service of optimization of these subsidies becomes a real added value, because it's a little bit complex, but also it's adapted to each project, and as each project has to be developed based on customer needs, these subsidies have to be adapted as well. And that's why that's one of the services. So they get the better of all subsidies available. They have no impact on corporate financing operation, so as a non-recourse and long-term junior debt. So as we will see in another presentation that Søren announced related to IFRS, the capacity to develop off-balance sheet project is almost impossible now because of the accounting rule. So Sofiac developed the next best thing, which is essentially a non-recourse and long-term junior debt, meaning that even though it will appear as a conditional debt on the balance sheet, it will not be taken into account by banks because it will be of a junior rank. And in that sense, it will enable the clients to continue to operate on a normal basis for their financial activities while still benefiting from this long-term opportunity and benefiting immediate positive cash flow from the project. What we've seen as well is the reduction of future CapEx needs becomes very important in the offer, because whatever the ESCO will implement as far as projects, it will enable the company to not invest in those projects and free capital for other type of investment that will be even more beneficial for them. So a lot of additional positive impacts from the Super ESCO in the case of Sofiac. Obviously, it improves the finances of the clients. It can bring certification as well, because with all the deep retrofit activities that it provides, then it can lead to these projects to enable clients to get certification. And it obviously enable them to achieve their ESG goals, nearing the net zero objective or contributing to it. As of today, Sofiac has 6 projects under implementation. One example is the airports of Montreal, the big airport, the 2 big facilities of the airports of Montreal. The total project implemented value is almost $65 million, and the emission reductions are quite important, and getting very often over 50% of the client emissions at no cost for them. So the current pipeline that Sofiac has is over $150 million at this time, and we expect the $200 million facility that we have to be expanded pretty rapidly, as we will have committed pretty much all of our financial capacity within probably the next year. So thank you for the opportunity to present it, and I will give the floor to my colleague Jalel for.
Thank you, Pierre. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, based on where you are. Thanks for the Global ESCO Network for the invitation, and my apologizes for not being able to resolve my cam problem. My name is Jalel Chabchoub. I'm Chief Investment Officer and Energy Efficiency Expert from the Energy Efficiency and Clean Cooking Division at the African Development Bank. As you probably know, in Africa, unfortunately, energy efficiency is still not considered as high priority in most of African countries' agendas, despite the fact that energy efficiency is one of the key components in slowing down the demand growth and manage better the energy demand, and involving the private sector in the energy efficiency market, not only on the technical aspects, but also on the financial front, is necessary to have a creative and sustainable energy efficiency market. But how this can be done? Theoretically, the answer seems quite simple. We have to provide solutions that should be born as answers to the barriers and gaps identified in each country addressing also the targeted sectors' specificities. Definitely, there is no one-size-fits-all solutions, since barriers are evolving with the market evolution and maturity and also countries' conditions. However, we have to rethink our way to address these barriers and avoid providing fragmented solution. And this what was provided in Africa for the last decades, where the African Development Bank and other stakeholders were just tackling the standards energy efficiency barriers, such the lack of technical capacity for energy auditing, the lack of financial mechanism incentives for energy efficiency solution providers, the absence of market facilitator, etc. And in fact, most of their barriers are interconnected, but also the problems lays on the restrictive procurement, contracting, and financial rules for the government sector, where there is a huge untapped potential for energy savings, in addition to the high perceived risk for energy efficiency project. However, most of the time, financing comes in the top of the barrier list, and unfortunately, it is one of the most perceived barrier. And I firmly believe that the problem is not financing availability. In fact, in the energy efficiency space, the leadership is one of the most critical ingredient. So at the African Development Bank, we choose using a more holistic approach to bring most complete solution in line with the African context and needs, that addressing also the general barriers that I just spoke about for the energy efficiency. And here the solution converges naturally to the Super ESCO concept or the Super ESCO approach, where most of these barriers are reduced and addressed. African countries are increasingly referencing to energy efficiency in their energy policy frameworks and nationally determined contributions. So, given the nascent nature of energy efficiency market, government should lead by example by investing in energy efficiency retrofits in public buildings and facilities. And here, we believe that ESCOs with energy performance contracting are powerful tools that governments can draw on to leverage private sector resources to improve energy efficiency of existing public facilities. There is no doubt that the Super ESCO approach has significant potential to address the limitation and barriers obstructing large-scale implementation of ESCO projects. During the last decade, the business model of energy services company based on energy performance contracting has been increasingly considered in different African countries' strategies for energy efficiency and market development. However, despite these various efforts, the ESCO market in most African countries is still in its infancy stage due to various barriers, notably the one generally related to energy efficiency market. The Super ESCO model is a flexible and adaptable scheme similar to the ESCO, and benefit and advantages are highlighted in the presentations of Pierre and Stéphane. So considering the African context, the Super ESCO could play an important role in driving and creating a sustainable evolving market. However, as also indicated by Stéphane and Pierre, government buy-in and ownership is important and essential for developing and establishing this market. And at the Africa Development Bank, we consider that public Super ESCO could be one of the central pillars to create such sustainable and evolving energy efficiency market. So building in our regional member countries growing interest in the Super ESCO concept, the African Development Bank put in place the Africa Super ESCO Acceleration Program. We call it ASAP, fully financed by the Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa. It was just approved with an overall dedicated envelope of $5 million US. It just was approved since we have this approval. We had this approval few days ago. So it is a technical assistance grant resources with the general objective to catalyze the development of the energy efficiency market in Africa through the design and implementation of energy efficiency projects developed by the Super ESCO and implemented mainly by the private sector, and creating also a market for the ESCOs and the energy performance contracting. The first phase of the ASAP will target up to 3 countries, notably Rwanda, Senegal, and South Africa, which are the most advanced countries today in the process of developing and implementation the Super ESCO scheme. But also, this might change based also on the changing priority of these countries. However, all other countries, African countries, also are candidates for that facilities. And the most advanced one that we have today are Burkina Faso and Cote d'Ivoire, where an assessment on the Super ESCO opportunities is ongoing and led by the African Development Bank. So the ASAP comprises 3 pillars, as you can see here. The first pillar is creating and operationalizing Super ESCO in the selected countries. Pillar 2, developing harmonized regional certification scheme for ESCO and energy services professionals and providing, which is we think it's important in that context. And the last component in the program, it is the program management, including recruitment also of a long-term consultant or what you call program officer to support the bank in rolling out the program. So let's dig a little bit more on each of these pillars to see how deep we are providing services to the countries to operate as a Super ESCO. So the first pillar, including 2 main broad activities. The first one is focusing on having an enabling environment for development and operationalization of the Super ESCO. And the intended activities including the development of a business plan for that Super ESCO, including notably all needed component for business operations such as market assessment, pipeline development, implementation strategy, assessment of the capacity of the Super ESCO and its partners, market potential estimation, targeted sector, establishing the strategy, including risk mapping and also risk mitigation options, but also include the analysis of the Super ESCO management structure, its resources and needs, and develop also a training and capacity building plan for its staff and client, as well as other actors, notably private sector, private ESCOs, financial partners, etc. Because it is important to focus on this because, as also mentioned, it is need the ESCO concept or the Super ESCO concept also need to be adapted for the specificities of each of the countries. For the hand-on capacity building, this will consist mainly in providing direct support for all Super ESCO day-to-day activities and management, hands-on and workshop training for staff and project partner, support also for energy performance contracting development, implementation and follow-up, as well as continuous risk assessment for the Super ESCO project and activity. For the training component, and based also on the training plan developed in the first phase during the business plan, training material will be developed and training delivered, and capacity building will be done considering also the specificities of each of the stakeholders. This is based on the needs, capacity, and level of market maturity and readiness for each of the countries. It also includes supporting the Super ESCO staff in acquiring energy audits, measurement and verification, and energy performance contracting certification, usually international certifications. These certifications will strengthen the credibility of the Super ESCO toward its partners. The next planned activity is related to process and procedures linked to Super ESCO operation, including project management, ESCO services procurement, administrative and accounting procedures, and so on. And also providing support in developing ESCO engineering business tool for planning and managing projects, loan, and energy performance contracting. And the last sub-activity planned under this activity 1 include information dissemination sessions and awareness program for market players, energy users, and dissemination also of information and lesson learned on the establishment and operationalization of Super ESCOs, as well as the organization of dissemination workshop in collaboration with the bilateral multilateral development agencies. The second activity under Pillar 1 will support the development of initial pipeline of energy efficiency projects, which we think is quite important, because without the pipeline, we could not have a good visibility on the needs for the ESCOs and also for the resources. So this is mainly include conducting energy audit, consisting in preparing and realization preliminary and details energy audit across at least 5 public sector, the most relevant ones, to develop a pipeline of bankable energy efficiency project, and assisting also the Super ESCO in negotiating with banks for loans, credit facilities, and in preparing and submitting grant request documents for donors approval. The second sub-activity consisting in reviewing the different business model and proposing the most appropriate one for the Super ESCO based on the international best practice for clients across the different economic sectors, taking also into account the existing national legal, regulatory, and policy conditions. And the final one is to carry out a minimum of 2 energy efficiency projects in order to set up standard documents, tools, procedures, and procurement process, and equally the energy performance contracting contract template. Under the second pillar, 3 board activity are planned. Activity 1, which is the development of a framework and process for harmonized regional certification scheme for ESCO and also energy efficiency professional, where we are referring to energy auditor mainly. The objective is to assess existing national framework conditions to develop and maintain high quality energy efficiency services supply, and assess also the existing international best practice in training and certification of the ESCOs and energy efficiency professional. And based on that assessment, to develop harmonized regional standards and develop and implement also the necessary core process for delivering this regional certification of both for both ESCOs and energy efficiency professional. Activity 2, for the development of tools for the authorization of the harmonized regional certification scheme, will target the development of standardized guidebooks for certification examination for energy efficiency professionals, also build an online registry and information sharing platform, and finally conducting training of trainer sessions. And the last activity 3 is related to communication on regional certification program for ESCOs and energy efficiency professional. And finally, the third pillar of our program is to have naturally program manager to ensure delivery of the ASAP program. So the final objective of the Super ESCO development in Africa is not only reducing public sector energy bills or realizing refurbishment and renovation from the savings. Yes, it is, but the ultimate objective is also to create specialized ESCOs that will migrate energy performance contracting to the private sectors, and here mainly building, commercial and industrial, and create also opportunities to put in place more adapted financial mechanism once the demand of the energy efficiency project will increase based on the market evolution, such a dedicated ESCO fund or line of credit, guaranteed fund for energy efficiency project, or equally insurance for saving guarantee and so on. So at the African Development Bank, we are supporting all African countries on project financing and technical assistance. And we are proud leading the Super ESCO implementation in Africa through the first dedicated program for Super ESCO implementation, not only in Africa, but I guess also in the world, since I did not see any similar facilities for Super ESCO development. And we have already put the foundation of the first Super ESCO on the continent through the Société d'Ingénierie Énergétique, SIE, in Morocco, as referenced by Stéphane in his presentation, where we have started months ago with the technical assistance, provided also by the Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa to assist SIE operate as a Super ESCO through support for about 2 years to build the team capacity and operating the first Super ESCO on the continent. We are also currently supporting the utility Kenya Power Lighting Company, KPLC, in Kenya, to establish the first utility-based Super ESCO where KPLC can extend its services beyond energy provider role to lead first the public sector efficiency improvement and also potentially to offer additional services related to energy efficiency to its clients, notably the industrial sector, where the same implementation scheme by the private sector will be maintained. To conclude, I just want to say that we believe that the Super ESCO will support the establishment of main pillars for a sustainable energy efficiency market in Africa and push ahead the energy efficiency as one of the priorities in the African countries' agenda. For that, we have developed the Africa Super ESCO Acceleration Program. I will stop here and give back the floor, and will be glad to answer any specific question you may have. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Jalel. Thank you, Stéphane, and thank you, Pierre, for your 3 excellent presentations on different aspects of Super ESCOs. May I ask the 3 of you to switch on your cameras? And I know, Jalel, that your camera doesn't work, unfortunately, so we would have to do with a black box where Jalel should have been. But you're still online with the microphone and the speaker, I hope.
Sure, yes.
Good. We have received a number of questions, which we expected, so no surprises there. We have another 20 minutes to go before the end of our webinar. And why not just jump out with the first question here, which is open to all of you. Is there competition between Super ESCOs and ESCOs? I don't know who of you will start. We'll go first. Stéphane, go ahead.
I can answer if you want. I think it could be perceived initially as competition, but in reality, there is absolutely no competition. The Super ESCO is there to really develop and unlock opportunities that the ESCOs are not able to develop for some reason. It could be there is an opportunity, but the financing is lacking. So the Super ESCO comes with the financing and unlocks the project. So the Super ESCO is not there to compete with ESCOs. Especially Super ESCO is usually, if you consider them in, I will let Pierre talk about private sector, but in the public sector, most ESCOs are not able to tackle projects directly with public entities. And this is where the Super ESCO is helping, because the Super ESCO is able to contract directly with government entities and then put the projects on the market for the private Super ESCOs. So it's really a mechanism to unlock a lot of projects for the ESCOs. And the ESCOs will work and continue to work in the private sector, develop their own projects, but the Super ESCO will help unlock a lot of projects.
So I would build on Stéphane's contribution by saying that in the public sector, it would be quite rare that it would be two public Super ESCOs in one country, obviously because of the nature of what they do. But in the private sector, there might be several in one country. And to just give you an example of Canada, the Canadian Infrastructure Bank is favoring the use of its financing for other Super ESCOs as well. The total market has been established probably at $20 billion just for Canada. And each Super ESCO, even though they would have 1 billion, would be potentially competing, but in such big market that I don't see the real nature of the competition there. Furthermore, as a Super ESCO very often will increase the size of the ESCO market, it will contribute to, yes, there's going to be competition within the ESCOs, but the Super ESCOs themselves will increase the market size and probably will enable the use of many in one country.
Jalel, how does that look in the programs that you're developing within the bank? Are you setting them? Are you aware of this potential conflict, or if there's a conflict at all?
Sure. We are really aware about that, and this is why we are saying in our program that the implementation should be done by the private sector. This is one of the conditions for that, and it is necessary to have the Super ESCO and the ESCOs as partners. They are not competing against each other. On the contrary, they are completing each other, because especially I'm talking about the African countries and the African context, where we do not have ESCOs, operating ESCOs, fully operated ESCOs, and where there is a need for government support. First, to build this capacity, to build the market of the ESCOs, and also to offer huge pipelines where the ESCOs can train themselves on the energy performance contracting through a very simple or low risk project. For example, as in the schools or offices where we don't have too much complex systems and equipment, and we need this support from the government to build the market. Now, once the market is well established, that for sure, maybe you can say there is a risk, but also the risk that the Super ESCO to implement projects, and in fact, it is not their role. The Super ESCO, it's a facilitator. It's not an execution agency or implementing project. No, just to facilitate. And in my opinion, there is no risk, at least talking about the program that we are running and we want to put in place. We make sure that the Super ESCO will never compete with the ESCO market. On the contrary, they will support the ESCO market development.
Thank you. We have also questions for each of you, more specifically, and maybe start out with Pierre. There's a question here on how is Sofiac managing performance and counterparty risk, and the latter regarding that after 10 to 15 years, private clients may have changed their business. Yeah.
Well, that risk is fully supported by the Super ESCOs as the question is formulated. So we take the financial risk of the client. So first of all, we diversify that risk by having many clients. Secondly, we qualify the clients on their financial viability. So they have to be, they have a very sound balance sheet and a very sustainable business. And that's about it for the sustainability of the whole scheme. The investors recognize that there might be default over time, but they build it into their expected return. And there's a lot of flexibility as far as how it works related to the fact that a business can be sold, so contracts can be transferred, and there's always an opt-out when a client wants to change its own operation, and therefore wants to buy back the contract. One last thing that I would add is that even though it's a 15-year contract, the capacity for clients to buy back the contract is rather a lot more shorter terms, because after the positive cash flow has been generated for 5-6 years, the capacity to buy back the contract with the generated value is existing. So there's a risk, and there's a risk that has to be taken by the Super ESCO, and it has to be internally structured to deal with that risk.
Okay, thank you. Maybe Pierre, just to continue on this, on the Sofiac, there's another question here exactly since the equity partners are involved to invest, what is the minimum returns you see on deciding which projects to go ahead with?
That's a very good question, because it would vary from the investors. So we're in a world where climate finance exists and where there's a lot of investors who are looking to either have decarbonization activities within their portfolio, either they want to be partner into the energy transition. So their interest in the return can vary quite a lot. We structured it as a global return and not a return per project. So each project have to have similar characteristics, but at the end of the day, we have to balance the fund return by the portfolio of projects we're able to generate. So it varies quite a lot based on the investors, and it varies quite a lot based on the clients. But we have a financial model that basically enables to put all these variation and get the expected returns to the investors.
Thank you very much. There's a question for you, Stéphane, here on your presentation on the 8 Super ESCOs that seem to only be focusing on buildings. Is there any specific reason for that?
Yes, in the sense that usually Super ESCOs are being put in place to tackle buildings. And if I take the example of, for example, Dubai, so there was, as I explained, a demand-side management strategy that was put in place by the Supreme Council of Energy, which has, I think, today 9 programs. One of them being existing buildings, and that's given to the Super ESCO. But they have 8 other programs that tackle multiple other things. There's one program on, for example, efficient lighting. There's one program on efficient irrigation. There is one on new buildings, so tackling the creation and the improvement of the building codes. So it's by design that the Super ESCO is kind of focusing on buildings. The example of Saudi is interesting because they've been working on buildings, but also they realized that all their roads and all their streets in the country are using very old lighting systems. So they decided that the Super ESCO should also focus on improving lighting, and there is really a dedicated program only focusing on this. So only focusing on replacing road lighting by efficient LEDs. So usually it's also linked to the kind of assets that the public authorities have. So they have buildings, they have roads, and that's where the Super ESCO is being tasked to improve.
And maybe follow up on that, Pierre, because Sofiac is not only focusing on buildings and the public sector. So what is the background for, or how is it possible to cover all under one roof?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's totally true that Sofiac is including industrial facilities. The planning that was done in 2019, 2020, pre-COVID, was thinking about 70% in the building sector and 30% in the industrial sector. Actually, after COVID, we're pretty much the other way around, so 70% in the industrial sector. There's 2 limitations in the industrial sector. First of all, the limitation of clients. not wanting you to play with their process. And the second one is the ESCOs having limitation as well to guarantee projects on the process side. So we have a project right now as an example of a biomass projects to turn to a cogeneration plant, and not that many ESCOs are keen to invest or to guarantee such projects. So the limitation are both, but what we're doing is we're working around that by developing project outside the process itself. So there's a lot of things that can be addressed within an industrial facility: cooling, lighting, heating, steam, compressed air, and so on, motors that can be approached by an ESCO, and they're willing to do so. So that's really the two limitations: the client limitations and willingness to use EPC, and the capacity of ESCOs to actually tackle these kind of projects. But we're open to work on these facilities. And I think we will have more than half of our activities in the industrial sector in the next few years.
Thanks. A question for Jalel on the ASAP program. It does cover the energy efficiency ecosystem through its pillars, but how are these implemented? Are they all in parallel, or are they in a particular sequence?
Well, as I said earlier, this is based on the country readiness and progress made on the energy efficiency side. But generally, for the implementation side, we start with the business plan. It's important, and most of the, for example, the countries that we are starting already in Kenya and Morocco, they have already an understanding about the potential of energy saving in the public sector. So it is already there. So we will build on the business plan on what they have as information, usually enough to build this business plan, and then based on the business plan, then we will build the capacities needed on the financial side, on the training and capacity building, and so on. So we are using a systematic methodology to make sure that each step that we are doing, we have the right information, we have the right also capacities and skills to build on to have the first project, because as you know, it's quite important to have a successful project from the start. So most of them based on the steps and the existing skills and resources, human resources, and also financial resources and capacity, then it will be adjusted and updated. But usually we start with that business plan. However, for the harmonization, for the one of the second pillar, harmonization, it's important. So we will start mostly in parallel when we launch the program to see or to have an assessment of the existing, especially in the different region in Africa, to see what they do have as standards, what they do have also as especially on the energy auditing, because there is no certification program except the one that we have in South Africa for the ESCOs, but all other countries, they do not have. So we will try to build from the start, starting with the energy auditing. As you know, it is important things for ESCO's development, at least to start with this, and then we will go for the certification for the ESCOs, especially when we will have a really dynamic ESCO market, because the objective is not only to focus on these countries, but also where the countries that are more advanced on the ESCO side, especially, for example, in Morocco and in Kenya, they can export also their knowledge and capacities to other countries and start or help building or exchanging the experience and knowledge about the progress made in these countries.
Thanks. And then a question to all of you, but maybe Jalel, you can start on this question, which is about Super ESCO's dialogue with international funds like the World Bank and of course the African Development Bank. How does that start, if there is one? Do the Super ESCOs exist, or could it be that they are already in existence going to the development banks for further financing, or is it for the development, or the dialogue would be by governments in order for them to develop Super ESCO? And I guess that could also be relevant for the ESCOs in the Middle East in that regard. So maybe Stéphane also, but Jalel, you would comment on that?
Yes, thank you so much, and thanks for this question. Listen, the development banks, they are working on different aspects of on the development, including the energy and the energy efficiency. And for example, as the development bank, we have the country strategy that we are doing every period to see what are the priorities of the countries and where we can support them. So there is a continuous dialogue with all these countries on the regular basis. And this adapted country strategy paper, it is also based on the country priorities. So if the countries, they do have a priority in their energy efficiency, that we will support them. So it is both ways. They can come from the countries, but also they can come from ourselves to support them on the development of the Super ESCOs. For example, as Super ESCOs or any other energy efficiency project. We are working with the other countries on developing some energy efficiency strategy or energy or national energy efficiency action plan. But also we think, and this is why we have created this Africa Super ESCO acceleration program. As I said also in my presentation, most of the countries, they already mentioned about ESCOs and the potential of having ESCOs and their capacity in developing the energy efficiency market. So we are taking this, we will build on the interest of these countries to provide solutions as technical assistance, and that for sure the objective, as I said, is not only to provide technical assistance, but also to build on this program, also to provide necessary financing for the implementation. And because we are seeking a continuity on what we are doing to avoid, as I said in my presentation, what we have been done on tackling just or to providing just a specific technical assistance and support. So here we are provided a complete package, and this is based on the country needs, but also based on our assessment where there is a potential. But finally, it is based on the country needs and the willingness to go with the project.
Thanks, Jalel. We are running out of time, in fact, and we have plenty of questions left. I hope I can offer that those questions that we are not able to answer here online, we could try to answer in writing afterwards. We have the identity of who has asked, so at least we will try to offer that and share that as part of the recording, maybe, if that's possible. I'm looking at my technical colleagues on the other side of the screen. We will try to accommodate all the questions in the best way possible. Maybe one last question for all three of you. Can Super ESCOs aggregate multi-site projects? Commercial sector clients with smaller food retail operations will want to package deep retrofit projects, but they are always too small, these projects. So would Super ESCOs be a way to get around the problem of too small project size? And I know that from our general work here that we face that very, very often, not only in energy efficiency but other contexts, that projects are too small. So is this an aggregation facility as well that can pool smaller projects into larger and investable ones?
Well, I would start by saying yes, but up to a limit, because everybody attending this seminar will understand that ESCOs is a very powerful tool, but it has its limitation as well. So the transaction costs and the capacity to develop such project has to be limited, but it's still there. So there's a limit of how low we can go within a project. But I would say that as Sofiac, we're aggregating projects that are rather small as an investment, and because we're extending the time of return, we're able to work with customers that have rather lower type of energy consumption, but not to the limit that we would go to $100,000 type of projects because it would be too small. But yes, we are going in that way into aggregating projects that are smaller for the benefit of our investors.
From my side, I have a very good example of this, which was done in Dubai, where 1,200 mosques have been retrofitted in 2 projects. So there were 2 packages of projects that were done, 600 mosques each. And this was done very efficiently, mosques being, spreaded around the area. So it was a lot of logistics. But the solution there was to standardize the measures, and mosques being very similar buildings, it was quite easy for the ESCO to standardize the measures that were done in the mosques, for example, focusing only on lighting and air conditioning. And this is what the Super ESCO has been able to do, is to allow the very fast retrofit of all those mosques in only 2 projects.
Definitely yes, and especially I can say more than that. That even this very small project where financially are not attractive or economically that are not attractive, where the Super ESCO can support for the realization, to create some kind of balance, because it's not because they are not, because here I'm talking especially, for example, for schools and far schools in remote areas where the cost of retrofit is quite high, but making the balance and making this retrofit, and they can support even financially to improve the viability of this project. So on the public sector, definitely yes, we can. The Super ESCO can support the aggregation of very small projects.
Thank you very much. That was the last question that we managed to answer online. As I said, we will try to accommodate the questions afterwards. We have come to the end of our webinar, and thank you for all of you for your participation, and also for those of you who are still hanging on. If you have felt alone out there, I assure you, you have not been. We have had record numbers of participants. We have got more than 175 have been online to join us on this Super ESCO presentation. We're very happy for your participation. We hope to see you again in our future webinars. Thank you very much. Over and out from